The unexpected pain. The jungle was thick with mist. Hot, heavy air pressed down on the soldiers as they marched through the dense alien forest. The sound of crunching leaves and distant, unknown creatures filled the silence. Lieutenant Jake Carter wiped sweat from his forehead. His legs felt heavy, his boots sinking into the damp ground with every step. It had been 6 hours since the joint training mission began. The humans and the Tavorians, a four-armed alien species, were working together in this exercise, but there was no real teamwork yet. The Tavorians walked ahead, moving with ease, barely making a sound. The humans, however, struggled against the heat and the rough terrain. Jake adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of his gear pressing against his back. His leg muscles burned, but he kept pushing forward. Then, a sudden, sharp pain shot up his right leg. "Ah!" Jake groaned as his knee buckled. His foot twisted, and he collapsed onto one knee, grabbing his thigh. His entire leg locked up. The pain was unbearable. He tried to move, but his muscle felt like a rock, frozen in place. "Carter, what's wrong?" Sergeant Diaz turned back, frowning. "Cramp," Jake hissed through clenched teeth. "Bad one." A few human soldiers stopped, but the Tavorians barely glanced at him. They stood tall, their forearms folded across their chests, watching with cold, unreadable expressions. "Drink some water," Diaz said, kneeling beside him. "Stretch it out." Jake gritted his teeth and tried, but the pain only got worse. His whole leg felt like it was on fire. The Tavorian warriors whispered among themselves. Their leader, Commander Varric, scoffed. "Humans are fragile," he muttered. Jake felt frustration rising. This was embarrassing. The Tavorians already saw humans as weak, and now he was proving them right. Then a shadow moved beside him. Sereth, a younger Tavorian, stepped forward. His deep violet eyes focused on Jake's leg. Unlike the others, he looked curious, not annoyed. Without a word, Sereth knelt down. His forearms moved with strange grace and precision. Two of his hands pressed against Jake's thigh. The other two rested on his lower back. "What are you doing?" Jake asked, breathing heavily. "Helping," Sereth replied simply. Before anyone could stop him, he pressed firmly against Jake's muscles. A sudden warmth spread through Jake's leg. It was like a wave of energy, pulsing from Sereth's hands into his muscles. The pain vanished instantly. Jake's eyes widened. What the hell? He stretched his leg. No pain, no tightness, just perfect, relaxed muscles. The human soldiers stood in shock. What just happened?" Diaz asked, staring at Sereth. Sereth stood up, dusting off his hands. "The energy was blocked. I released it." Jake got to his feet. His leg felt completely normal. Better than normal. That was incredible. "How did you?" "It is a simple thing," Sereth interrupted. "Why is this surprising?" Commander Varric took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Sereth, that was unnecessary." The other Tavorians looked uncomfortable. "Unnecessary," Diaz repeated. "He just healed him in 2 seconds. That's insane." "This is normal for us," Sereth said. "We do not use it often." Jake exchanged a look with Diaz. Something wasn't right. If the Tavorians had this ability, why had they never mentioned it before? "I don't get it," Jake said. "You can just fix muscles." "Yes." "Then why didn't you tell us?" Sereth hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His fingers twitched as if choosing his next words carefully. "It is not for others to know," Varric interrupted. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "We move." The Tavorians turned and continued walking. Sereth hesitated for a second, then followed. Jake stood still, his mind racing. "What just happened?" Diaz whispered. "I don't know," Jake admitted. He flexed his leg again. The pain was gone, but something didn't feel right. The Tavorians were hiding something. And Jake was going to find out what. The mystery of the Tavorian touch. The jungle felt different after what had just happened. The air was still thick with heat, but now there was something else. A strange, unspoken tension between the humans and the Tavorians. Lieutenant Jake Carter could still feel the warmth in his leg, the lingering sensation of Sereth's hands on his muscles, fixing them in seconds. It was impossible. Humans had spent centuries developing medicine, painkillers, and advanced treatments. And yet, a four-armed alien had just erased his pain in an instant. Jake walked now with ease, but his mind was racing. He wasn't the only one thinking about it. Behind him, Sergeant Diaz kept glancing at the Tavorians, his expression unreadable. The other human soldiers whispered among themselves. Some seemed impressed. Others looked uneasy. "Did you feel anything weird when he touched you?" Diaz finally asked, keeping his voice low. Jake nodded. "Yeah, it was like heat. Like my muscles just relaxed on their own. No pain, no stiffness. Just gone. That's not normal." "No," Jake agreed. "It's not." Up ahead, the Tavorians moved like ghosts through the dense jungle. Their leader, Commander Varric, hadn't spoken since the incident. But Sereth kept glancing back at Jake. There was something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even concern. Jake didn't know what to make of it. A test of truth. The squad reached a small clearing where Major Reynolds, the human officer in charge, called for a break. The soldiers removed their gear, stretched, and drank water. But Jake had other ideas. He found Sereth standing near a fallen tree, adjusting the straps of his equipment. Jake took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey." Sereth looked up, his violet eyes calm but watchful. "Yes." Jake hesitated. He wasn't sure how to ask this without sounding crazy. "What you did back there," Jake said, "that wasn't normal. At least, not for humans." Sereth tilted his head slightly, considering his words. "It is normal for us. But we've been working with Tavorians for over a year now," Jake continued. "We've fought alongside you. We've seen your technology, your weapons, even your medicine. No one ever mentioned this." Sereth remained silent. Jake decided to push further. He reached out and grabbed Sereth's wrist. The other Tavorians tensed immediately. Varric turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" Jake ignored him. He looked at Sereth, gripping his arm firmly. "Do it again." Sereth frowned. "Again?" "Yeah," Jake said. "My shoulder's been stiff for days. If you can fix muscles, prove it." Sereth hesitated. He glanced at Varric, who gave him a warning look. But then, slowly, Sereth raised his hands. The other Tavorians muttered among themselves. Some looked displeased. Sereth placed 2 hands on Jake's shoulder, 2 on his upper back. A strange pulse of energy passed through Jake's body. His muscles unclenched instantly. The tension, the soreness, all of it disappeared. Jake exhaled sharply. His whole upper body felt lighter, looser, holy. Before he could finish, Diaz stepped forward. "No way," Diaz said. He yanked off his glove and held out his wrist. "I twisted this 2 weeks ago. Still aches like hell. Fix it." Sereth looked at Varric. The commander's expression was cold and stern. Sereth sighed, then pressed his fingers against Diaz's wrist. Another pulse. Diaz blinked. He turned his hand, flexed his fingers, then gave a stunned laugh. No way. The human soldiers were no longer whispering. They were watching. And they weren't the only ones. Varric took a sharp step forward. "That is enough." His voice was like steel. "This conversation ends here." The jungle went silent. Secrets that shouldn't be known. Major Reynolds finally stood up from where he had been watching. He walked over slowly, arms crossed. "I disagree, Commander," Reynolds said. "I think this conversation is just getting started." Varric's jaw tightened. This is not for humans to discuss. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. That's funny, because it just saved one of my men. Jake watched the exchange carefully. Varric wasn't just annoyed. He was concerned. Something about this healing ability wasn't supposed to be seen by humans. Reynolds took a step closer. Can you do this for serious injuries? Broken bones? No, Varric said immediately. And you will stop asking. Reynolds didn't buy it. That's a pretty fast answer. Varric's voice was sharp. Because it is final. Silence stretched between the two officers. And then Reynolds spoke again. Sereth. Sereth hesitated. His fingers twitched. Varric turned to him, his eyes full of warning. But Sereth didn't speak. Jake felt a chill. Sereth wasn't saying no. He was just choosing not to answer. Reynolds noticed too. His expression darkened. Commander, I think we both know you're hiding something. Varric stiffened. The humans and Tavorians stood on opposite sides now. The tension was growing. The air felt heavier. Jake clenched his fists. He didn't know what was going on yet, but one thing was clear. The Tavorians weren't telling the whole truth, and the humans weren't going to stop until they found out. A gift or a weapon. The air between the humans and Tavorians was no longer just tense, it was dangerous. Lieutenant Jake Carter could feel it in every movement, in every cautious glance exchanged between the two species. The jungle had once been just hot and humid, now it felt suffocating. No one spoke for several minutes after Commander Varric's sharp warning. The human soldiers stood together, their weapons hanging at their sides, but their postures tense. The Tavorians did the same, their four-armed figures motionless, watching. Something about Sereth's healing ability had set off an alarm, one that the Tavorians clearly did not want to ring. But it was too late. Major Reynolds was no fool. He had spent years dealing with alien species, negotiating with allies, and strategizing against enemies. He knew when someone was hiding something, and Varric was definitely hiding something. Reynolds took a deep breath. His eyes locked on the Tavorian commander. This ability, your healing touch, if it's so normal for your people, why have we never heard about it? Varric's face remained unreadable. Because it does not concern you. That answer wasn't good enough. Reynolds took a slow step forward. You expect me to believe that a skill this valuable, a skill that could save thousands, maybe millions of lives, is something you just chose not to share. Jake watched carefully. Varric's expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed slightly. The human soldiers were listening closely now. So were the Tavorians. Even Sereth, standing between both groups, looked uneasy. This is our way, Varric said coldly. We do not teach it. We do not use it freely. Diaz scoffed. Yeah? Then why did Sereth just use it on me and Jake? Varric's violet eyes flicked toward Sereth. The younger Tavorian stiffened but said nothing. Reynolds nodded. Exactly. Sereth healed 2 of my men in seconds. No medicine, no tools, just a touch. So tell me, Commander, if this ability is so dangerous, why does he still have it? Varric's jaw tightened. Because he is young and foolish. Jake's stomach twisted. That wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. The line between healing and destruction. Jake had had enough. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. If Sereth can heal like this, then I have to ask, what else can he do? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Sereth looked away. Varric's fingers curled into fists. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. I see. You're not just afraid of us knowing about this. You're afraid of what happens if we ask the next question. Varric's voice was sharp as a blade. There is no next question. Jake felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. Diaz took a step closer, lowering his voice. Sereth, can this ability be used to hurt people? Sereth's hands tensed slightly. His gaze flicked to Varric, as if asking permission to answer. Varric's voice was ice cold. Sereth will say nothing more. That was enough of an answer. Jake's stomach tightened. Sereth could heal muscles, erase pain instantly. But if that power could be used for one thing, it could be used for another. Could he paralyze? Could he stop a heart? Reynolds saw it too. His voice became dead serious. You're not just hiding an ability, you're hiding a weapon. The Tavorian warriors immediately shifted into a defensive stance. Varric's eyes burned with warning. We do not use it as a weapon. Reynolds' expression didn't change. Maybe you don't, but you could. The spark of a dangerous idea. Jake suddenly realized why Varric was acting so aggressively. It wasn't just about hiding the power. It was about stopping humans from asking the wrong questions. Because humans loved weapons. Jake could already feel it in the air. The human soldiers were thinking it, calculating. If Sereth could heal a cramp instantly, what about a bullet wound? Could he stop someone from bleeding out? And if he could relax a muscle, could he tighten it? Could he snap bones? Jake could see it now. The way the high-ranking military officials on Earth would react. The way scientists would study this ability. The way generals would want to use it. They wouldn't stop at healing. They'd want more. And the Tavorians knew it. Sereth's secret. Before anyone could say another word, Sereth suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet, but steady. We are not afraid of your people knowing, he said. We are afraid of what will happen when they do. His words sent a chill through the group. Varric shot him a sharp glare. Sereth. Sereth didn't back down. His violet eyes met Jake's. In our history, there were warriors who could do more than heal. More than relax muscles. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Sereth's voice dropped lower. They could reach into the body and stop the heart. The silence was instant. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the jungle seemed to go quiet. A dangerous decision. Jake felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed. That was different. Reynolds' face was unreadable, but Jake could see the gears turning. A soldier who could kill with a touch. No blood. No mess. No weapons. It would be the most dangerous tool in human history. Varric's voice broke the silence. This conversation is over. But Reynolds took a step forward. No, Commander. It's just beginning. The moment he said it, Jake knew this was about to go very, very wrong. Because now, it wasn't just about a secret. It was about control. And humans weren't going to let this go. The hidden danger. The jungle no longer felt like just a battleground for a training mission. It felt like a battlefield for something far more dangerous. Lieutenant Jake Carter could see it in the way the humans and the Tavorians now stood on opposite sides. Their formation had subtly shifted. It wasn't just a break anymore. It was a standoff. The air was thick with tension. Major Reynolds wasn't backing down. His sharp blue eyes were locked onto Commander Varric, the Tavorian leader, with calculated intensity. And Varric. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a blade, knowing one wrong move could be deadly. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. No one spoke. Because Sereth's words still hung in the air like a death sentence. They could reach into the body and stop the heart. Jake's pulse hammered. His breathing was slow and steady. But inside, his mind raced. The implications were too big, too dangerous. A species with the power to heal instantly, but also the power to kill without a weapon. And now, the humans knew. Sereth's burden. The silence finally broke when Diaz let out a slow, shaky breath. So let me get this straight, he said, voice quieter than usual. This ability, you can use it to kill. Just by touching someone. Sereth didn't answer. He didn't have to. Jake saw it in his expression, the tension, the way his hands flexed as if remembering something painful. Sereth was afraid. Not of the humans, not of the Tavorians, but of himself. Commander Varric's voice was cold as steel. That knowledge should never have left our kind. Reynolds took a slow, measured step forward. But it did, he said. And now, we need answers. Varric's gaze darkened. No, Major. What you want is power. A few human soldiers shifted uneasily. Jake felt the weight of those words. Because, was Varric wrong? He looked at Reynolds and saw the wheels turning. Not in a greedy way, not yet, but in a military way. Strategizing. Calculating. How could this power be used? How could it be controlled? How could it benefit humanity? Jake didn't like where this was heading. A dangerous experiment. I want a demonstration, Reynolds said. The moment he spoke, every Tavorian tensed. Varric's expression turned deadly. Absolutely not. Sereth's breath caught. What? Reynolds remained calm. Not the lethal part, he clarified. The healing. I need to see how far this can go. Varric's jaw clenched. Your curiosity will destroy you. Diaz let out a nervous chuckle, but no one laughed. Jake looked at Sereth. If you can heal small injuries, can you fix something worse? A sprain? A deep cut? Sereth hesitated. I do not know. Reynolds turned to his men. Anyone here have an injury? A private stepped forward hesitantly, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a nasty gash on his arm. It was mostly scabbed over, but the bruising around it suggested it was still painful. Cut myself on some jagged metal in the last drill, the private said. Hurts like hell. Reynolds looked at Sereth. Fix it. Sereth didn't move. His four hands clenched, his shoulders stiffened. Jake saw it before anyone else. Fear. This is a mistake, Sereth murmured. Reynolds' gaze hardened. Show us. Sereth swallowed, then reluctantly stepped forward. The Tavorians looked uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. Even Varric. Sereth raised two hands and placed them on the soldier's wound. Jake held his breath. Then, the pulse. It was different this time, not just a warm sensation, a deep, pulling energy. The private gasped sharply. The bruising faded. The wound knitted shut, scabbing over, then vanishing as if it had never been there. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The soldier flexed his arm. I don't feel anything. It's like it was never there. Stunned silence. Then, clapping. Reynolds smiled. Incredible. Jake felt sick. This wasn't just discovery. This was the beginning of something else. Something dangerous. The cost of power. Sereth stepped back, his breathing uneven. Jake noticed the way his hands trembled slightly. You okay? Jake asked. Sereth exhaled slowly. That was more than I expected. Reynolds didn't care. His mind was already on the next step. How far can this go? Varric's voice cut like a knife. Enough. Reynolds didn't back down. If you can heal wounds, can you mend a broken bone? Jake turned to Sereth, expecting another refusal. But this time, Sereth didn't answer. He just looked away, which meant the answer was yes. The realization hit Jake like a punch to the gut. They weren't just talking about small healing. Sereth's people could reverse fatal injuries. They could do what human medicine never could. And if they could do that, then they could also break things just as easily. Jake's stomach twisted. They had to stop this. Now. But it was too late. Reynolds looked at Sereth, his expression filled with determination. You're going to teach us. Sereth's eyes widened. Varric's hands tightened into fists. He will do no such thing. Reynolds stepped forward. Then we have a problem. Commander. The tension snapped like a live wire. In that moment, Jake realized this wasn't a secret anymore. It was a conflict. And if someone didn't stop it, this mission wouldn't just be a training exercise. It would be the beginning of a war. The forgotten power. The jungle felt smaller now. It wasn't the thick canopy overhead or the humid air pressing down on them. It was the silence. The kind of silence that came before a storm. Lieutenant Jake Carter could see it unfolding right in front of him. Major Reynolds stood firm, his expression cold and calculating. His men were already thinking ahead. strategizing, imagining the possibilities. And the Tavorians. They stood still, but Jake could sense it. The tension, the restrained anger. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was the moment that would decide everything. Because one thing was now clear. The humans would not let this power go. And the Tavorians. They would never give it up. Lines are drawn. Sereth looked at his own hands. They were still shaking. The weight of what he had done, what he had revealed, was pressing down on him. Jake had seen soldiers under pressure before, but this was different. Sereth wasn't just worried. He was terrified. But not of the humans. Of himself. "You okay?" Jake asked quietly. Sereth exhaled, his breath shaky. "No." Commander Varric's voice broke through the tension. "This conversation is over," he said. "We are leaving." Reynolds stepped forward. "You don't get to make that decision, Commander." The moment he said it, everything changed. The Tavorian warriors shifted into defensive stances. Jake's stomach twisted. "This is a mistake," he said, stepping between them. "Let's just take a second to think." Reynolds didn't even look at him. His gaze was locked on Varric. "We've fought alongside each other. We've saved each other's lives. So why keep this a secret?" Varric's jaw tightened. "Because it is dangerous." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Dangerous for who?" Sereth finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "For everyone." The jungle was dead silent. And then, Sereth took a slow, careful breath. "If you knew everything, you wouldn't be asking to learn this. You'd be asking how to forget it." Jake felt the weight of those words. But Reynolds, he wasn't listening anymore. The truth that should have stayed buried. Reynolds took a slow step forward, his expression hardening. "Then tell me, Sereth, what are we missing?" Sereth hesitated. His hands twitched at his sides. He looked at Varric, at the other Tavorians. Then he made his decision. "You already know what this ability can do," Sereth said softly. "But you don't understand what it has done." The soldiers exchanged glances. Sereth took a deep breath. And then he told them. "A forgotten war. Long ago," Sereth began, "our people were not healers. We were warriors." Jake felt a chill crawl up his spine. "We were born into battle," Sereth continued. "For centuries, our kind fought. Against ourselves, against other species. We mastered weapons, tactics, strategy. But it was never enough." He lifted his hands, staring at them. "So we turned inward. We studied our own bodies, our own energy. And we discovered what you saw today." "The healing?" Jake asked. Sereth nodded. "At first, yes, we learned to mend our wounds, to strengthen ourselves in battle. We became unstoppable." Jake could see the soldiers absorbing this information, already picturing what an army like that could do. But Sereth's expression darkened. "And then we realized," he whispered, "if we could restore life, we could also take it away." The jungle felt colder. The power that destroyed a civilization. "Our warriors became something else," Sereth continued. "Something terrifying. They could reach into an enemy's body and stop the heart instantly. They could crush a man's lungs without touching him. They could turn pain into a weapon." Jake felt his blood run cold. They became assassins, executioners, monsters. Silence. Then Diaz, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're saying your people wiped themselves out?" Sereth nodded. "Our greatest war lasted less than a day. No armies, no fleets, just a handful of warriors. And when it was over, nearly half of our population was dead." Jake saw it now. Why the Tavorians were so disciplined. Why they were so careful. Why they never spoke of this power. They weren't just hiding it. They were terrified of it. Reynolds makes his move. Reynolds exhaled sharply. He looked at Sereth, then at Varric. "You expect me to believe that? That you just buried this ability and never used it again. Varric's voice was ice cold. Yes. Reynolds shook his head. That's a waste of power. Jake's stomach dropped. Sir, Jake said, stepping in, we should think about this. I am thinking. Reynolds cut him off. His gaze locked onto Sereth. You're going to teach us. Sereth took a slow step back. No, he said. Reynolds' eyes hardened. That wasn't a request. The human soldiers shifted. The Tavorians tensed. Jake's breath caught. This was about to go very, very wrong. The breaking point. Commander Varric stepped forward. If you try to force this, Major, it will be a mistake you cannot undo. Reynolds didn't move. That sounds like a threat. Varric's voice was like a storm. No, it is a warning. The jungle felt like it was closing in. Jake's instincts screamed at him. Stop this. Now. And then. Reynolds took a step forward. Varric raised a hand. The moment snapped like a wire under too much tension. Sereth moved first. And the world changed. A dangerous situation. The moment Sereth moved, the jungle erupted into chaos. 1 second, the humans and Tavorians were locked in a tense standoff. The next, everything changed. Sereth's hands blurred. Jake barely saw him move. He expected an attack, expected to see Sereth strike Major Reynolds or the other soldiers. But that didn't happen. Instead, he went for Varric. His hands landed on the Tavorian commander's chest. Not an attack. A warning. The air crackled. Jake felt something shift, like an unseen force rippling through the space between them. Varric stiffened. For half a second, his body locked up. His forearms twitched, muscles going rigid. His breath caught in his throat. And then, it was over. Sereth pulled back. Varric exhaled sharply, staggering back. His hands trembled slightly. Just for a moment. Then he fixed Sereth with a look of pure fury. Jake realized what had just happened. Sereth had just shown every single person here exactly what he could do. A power that shouldn't exist. No one moved. The jungle was silent again, but this wasn't the same tense quiet from before. This was something else. Something worse. Jake's heart pounded. Major Reynolds was staring at Sereth. His expression wasn't shock or fear. It was calculation. Sereth had just immobilized his own commander, a powerful, highly trained Tavorian warrior. With a touch, Jake saw it in Reynolds' eyes. This isn't just a healing ability. This is control. The realization was like a gunshot. Dias shifted uncomfortably. Some of the other human soldiers were too still. They weren't afraid. They were considering what this meant. Reynolds makes his play. Reynolds stepped forward. His movements were careful, measured. Sereth, he said, voice calm. That was impressive. Jake knew exactly where this was going. Reynolds was a military man, a strategist. He had just witnessed something that could change warfare forever. And now, he wanted it. You've proven your ability, Reynolds continued. You've demonstrated your control. His next words sent a chill down Jake's spine. Now you're going to teach us. Varric immediately stepped between them, rage burning in his violet eyes. This conversation is over, Varric snarled. We are leaving. Now. Reynolds didn't back down. That's not your decision, Commander. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Reynolds wasn't threatening them with weapons. He was threatening them with knowledge. Because now, the humans knew. They knew Sereth's ability was real. They knew it could be used for more than just healing. And they weren't going to let it go. The unthinkable. Sereth stayed still. His breathing was uneven. Jake could see the battle happening inside him. He was caught between two worlds. Between his people, who saw this ability as a curse, a burden, and the humans, who saw it as an opportunity. Finally, Sereth spoke. I will not teach you. Reynolds' expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Jake knew that look. Reynolds wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. He was planning his next move. That was far worse. "Seraph," Reynolds said, carefully, "think about this. If you work with us, if we learn this together, we could do things no one's ever done before. We could save lives. We could end wars before they start." Jake took a step forward. "Sir, we don't even fully understand." Reynolds cut him off. "I understand enough, Lieutenant." His gaze snapped back to Seraph. "This is an offer, Seraph. Work with us. Teach us. Help us." Seraph's hands clenched. His voice was quiet. "No." Reynolds exhaled sharply. His jaw tightened. "You don't want to do this," Reynolds warned. Seraph's eyes darkened. "No, Major. You don't want to do this." Jake's gut twisted. This was about to go bad. And then Reynolds made a mistake. A line crossed. Reynolds nodded to his men. "Take him." Jake's blood went cold. "What the hell?" Diaz snapped, stepping back. Varric immediately stepped forward, but 3 soldiers had already reached for their weapons. Tavorian warriors reacted instantly. 2 of them moved in front of Seraph. Another drew a weapon from his belt, a curved alien blade. The situation collapsed in seconds. Jake's heart pounded. This wasn't a standoff anymore. This was one wrong move away from a fight. And if that happened, it wouldn't just be between the people here. It would be between their entire species. The final warning. Seraph suddenly raised a hand. Everything stopped. Even Reynolds froze. Seraph looked at him. And for the first time, Jake saw something terrifying in his expression. Not fear, not anger. Resolve. Seraph stepped forward, stopping just inches from Reynolds. "You do not understand what you are asking for," he said, voice like steel. Reynolds held his ground. "Then explain it to me." Seraph took a slow breath. Then he reached out. Jake barely had time to react before Seraph's fingers brushed Reynolds' chest. And then Reynolds collapsed. Hard. His body seized. His muscles locked up, rigid and frozen. His breath hitched. Jake felt his heart stop. Seraph had done something. For one long, agonizing second, Reynolds was completely still. Then he gasped for air. His body shook as he fell forward, catching himself on his hands. His breath was ragged, uneven. His face was pale. Jake stared in horror. It was only 5 seconds. But Reynolds had just been dead. A final choice. Seraph stepped back. The jungle felt different now. It was over. Not the fight. Not the mission. The trust. Varric's voice was calm but final. "This conversation is finished." The Tavorians turned. They were leaving. Jake saw it in Seraph's eyes. They weren't just walking away from this moment. They were walking away from humanity. Jake's hands clenched. He knew. They had just lost something priceless. Something they might never get back. And the worst part, it was humanity's fault. The ultimate shock. The jungle felt different now. The humid air still clung to their skin. The strange alien trees still stretched toward the sky. But the world had shifted. And Jake Carter knew this was the moment everything changed. Seraph stood over Major Reynolds, who was still on his hands and knees, struggling to breathe. Just seconds ago, Seraph had done the unthinkable. He had stopped Reynolds' heart. Jake's hands tightened into fists. He wanted to say something, do something. But what could he say? What could anyone say? The Tavorians were already leaving. Varric didn't look back. Neither did the other warriors. They moved with purpose, finality. They weren't just retreating from this conversation. They were walking away from humanity itself. And humanity had no one to blame but themselves. A line crossed. Stop them. Reynolds' voice was weak, but it carried enough force to freeze everyone in place. Jake turned sharply. "Sir." "Stop them," Reynolds ordered again, voice stronger this time. He pushed himself up, face still pale from what had just happened. His breath was uneven. His body trembled. And yet, his eyes burned. Jake saw it. Reynolds wasn't just recovering. He was angry. More than that, he was furious. "They assaulted a commanding officer," Reynolds said, his voice cold as steel. "This is an act of aggression. We can't let them walk away." Jake felt his stomach drop. Diaz spoke up, alarmed. "Sir, let's think about this. I have thought about it." Reynolds turned toward the remaining soldiers. His expression was unreadable. "We can't let this ability disappear," he said. "We can't let them keep it to themselves." Jake felt sick. He had known. From the moment Sereth first healed his leg, he had known this was where it would end. Because humans didn't just discover things. They took them, controlled them. They turned them into weapons. And now Reynolds was going to do exactly that. The final stand. Jake's mind raced. This was no longer about curiosity, no longer about learning from an ally. If Reynolds ordered his men to stop the Tavorians by force, then this wasn't just a mission anymore. It was an act of war. He saw it in the way Varric finally turned back to look at them. The Tavorian commander's face was unreadable. But his hands, they were ready for battle. Sereth, too, had shifted his stance. No weapons, no aggression, just readiness. They wouldn't fight unless forced to. But if humanity chose this path, Jake knew the Tavorians wouldn't hold back. Jake took a deep breath. Then he stepped forward. Between Reynolds and the Tavorians. Between war and peace. "Sir," he said carefully, "we can't do this." Reynolds didn't look at him. "Step aside, Carter." Jake stood his ground. "I won't." For the first time, Reynolds looked him in the eye. "You're disobeying a direct order, Lieutenant." Jake's heart pounded. He glanced around at the other soldiers. Some looked uncertain. Some still held their weapons, but they weren't aiming them. They were waiting, watching. And Jake realized this was his moment. The moment he had to make a choice. The moment he had to decide what kind of man he was. And he already knew the answer. A choice that can't be undone. Jake turned back to the Tavorians. Sereth was watching him closely, trusting him. Jake exhaled and looked at Reynolds again. "We were supposed to be allies," Jake said, his voice steady. "We weren't supposed to come here to steal from them." Reynolds' eyes darkened. "You think they're allies after what they just did to me?" Jake held his ground. "They warned us," he said, "and we didn't listen." Reynolds' hands tightened into fists. For a second, Jake thought he was about to order the attack anyway. But then, another voice spoke. "This is wrong." Everyone turned. Sergeant Diaz stepped forward. His expression was grim, but resolved. "I get it," Diaz said. "I get why this is tempting. But this isn't how we do things. Not like this." More soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Jake saw the hesitation in their eyes. Reynolds saw it too. And in that moment, Jake knew. Reynolds had lost. This wasn't a battle he could win. Not because he didn't have the authority, but because no one wanted to follow him down this path. Finally, Reynolds exhaled sharply. His anger didn't fade, but he gave up. "Fine," he said, voice tight with frustration. "Let them go." Jake let out a slow breath. It was over. A final goodbye. The Tavorians didn't say anything. They just turned and left. But as they disappeared into the jungle, Sereth hesitated. He looked at Jake one last time. There was something in his eyes. A message, a warning, a question. Jake nodded. He understood. This wasn't the end. Not really. Because now, the humans knew. They knew about the Tavorians' power, and sooner or later, someone, somewhere, would try to claim it. Jake only hoped that when that day came, he wouldn't be on the wrong side of history, a future in the balance. The jungle swallowed the Tavorians, and they were gone. The human squad packed up their gear, preparing for the long trek back to base. Jake walked beside Diaz, his mind still racing. "You think this is really over?" Diaz asked. Jake glanced at Reynolds, who was still fuming, lost in thought. Then he looked at the trees, where Sereth had disappeared. Jake shook his head. "No." Diaz sighed. "Yeah, me neither." They kept walking. And somewhere, deep in the jungle, an ancient secret remained just out of reach, waiting for the day humanity came looking for it again.